Autumn 2018. Deep forest. Beyond the town in northern Ontario stands a stone that doesn't feel like a stone. A slab of bedrock carved with 255 symbols under open sky. Rectangular, 4 by 5 feet, 255 runes. Mysterious, yes. But that's just the surface. Behind these runes are weeks of invisible labor, carved prayers, forgotten scripts. The mystery deepens like a cold mist. Then questions, weathered marks, hidden soil. To understand the truth, archaeologists must decode a language most people forgot existed, a script instead of silence, devotion instead of answers. And there's more. Swedish workers, bold decisions, and a price you don't see in history books. Can faith make you remembered if it slowly disappears into stone? And the real question, who actually carved this prayer? And why does this mystery matter today? If you enjoy deep investigations into archaeological mysteries and the people who left them behind, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's begin. Autumn morning 2018. The forests of northern Ontario hold secrets like a vault. The air tastes of pine needles and damp earth. Beyond Wawa, a small town roughly 465 miles northwest of Ottawa, past trees that run for miles, a storm tears through. Wind, rain, roots giving way, and then an exposure that refuses the word accident. The Wawa Runestone. It emerges from beneath centuries of soil like a fragment of Scandinavia transplanted to Canada. Bedrock surface, deeply carved symbols, a boat with 16 figures catching the filtered light. Roughly 1.2 meters by 1.5 meters, 4 feet by 5 feet across, 255 runic characters, a carved vessel beside them. Beneath the symbols and imagery, a marvel of devotion from roughly the 1800s. Religious text carved entirely, prayers etched in forgotten script, and a message written in characters most of Europe had abandoned centuries before. Numbers signal magnitude, but they do not deliver the sensation. Stand before the stone and look down. Runes climb across the surface. A rectangular border carries ancient symbols and deliberate detail. Exposed bedrock underfoot. Forest canopy filtering autumn daylight. The carving is staged to mystify, to announce that you have discovered something deliberately extraordinary. Step past the main inscription, the prayer text, the ordered rows with their angular characters, the boat carving with its mysterious passengers, and another face appears. Behind the mystery lies infrastructure. Deep beneath the surface, layers of soil the depth of several inches covered everything. No tools found nearby. No campsite holding evidence of habitation. No artifacts, china, metal fragments, or personal effects in careful order. The stone itself is laid out not for display, but for concealment. There is a carving and nothing more. A boat depicted beside the prayer, long and narrow, 16 figures rendered as simple forms, hidden from view. 14 X marks arranged deliberately, painted institutional mystery, and carved by bare dedication weave a second circulatory system through the question. Someone moved along these markings unseen, so prayers are carved before anyone knows, meaning runs deep before interpretation wakes, and mystery appears the moment it is exposed. The cost of understanding is heavy. Archaeologists arrive by road. Equipment moves in slowly. Each examination must be documented without disturbing the fragile surface. The mystery demands attention. Weathered stone, centuries of exposure, a meaning that asks for interpretation, a language that requires translation. Autumn of 2018 is a discovery. Rain threatens the exposed surface, soil threatens to reclaim the stone. For a handful of days, the find feels urgent. Under the excitement, a quiet pressure gathers. The stone is remarkable, and it is also a puzzle that resists easy answers at a pace difficult to sustain. The carving is real, The mystery is real. Together, they will govern every question that follows. An unspoken challenge present that morning, and sharper with each passing month, begins to form. How long can this last? To understand what comes next, you have to understand who could have made this place and why. Let's go back to the beginning. The man who first saw this stone was not what you might expect. A local historian from Wawa walking through northern Ontario bush after a storm in 2018. The discovery came by accident of nature. A tree had fallen, roots tearing through soil, and there, beneath decades of forest floor, lay carved bedrock, unlike anything documented in the region. The symbols were strange, angular, deliberately arranged. This was not random scarring from ice or erosion. This was writing, but the historian was cautious. He had heard of fake runestones before. The Kensington runestone in Minnesota, long debated and dismissed by most scholars as fraudulent. He wanted verification before word spread. He took photographs and contacted Ryan Primrose, director of the Ontario Centre for Archaeological Education based in New Liskeard. Primrose, an archaeologist with decades of field experience, studied the images with mounting interest. He was careful, methodical, uneasy with premature announcements. His experience ran to indigenous archaeology, colonial sites, and artifact authentication. He had examined rock art across northern Ontario, petroglyphs left by First Nations peoples centuries before European contact. This carving was different. The symbols appeared to be Nordic runes, characters from an alphabet used in Scandinavia centuries ago. But Nordic runes in Canada, hundreds of miles from any documented Norse presence, raised immediate red flags. Primrose knew the dangers. If this were announced prematurely as a Viking site, it would draw media frenzy, treasure hunters, vandals. If it turned out to be fake, credibility would be destroyed. If it were real but misunderstood, the stone could be damaged before proper study. He decided on something few archaeologists want. Not a press release for attention, but a private investigation, a careful, years-long study, a place to think, document, and verify amid controlled access. The question was where? In late 2018, Primrose visited the site. The location stood on private property in dense forest. Access required permission and discretion. The bedrock slab measured approximately 1.2 meters by 1.5 meters, roughly 4 feet by 5 feet. Carved into its surface were 255 distinct symbols, arranged in neat horizontal rows within a chiseled rectangular border. The carving was deep, several millimeters into hard Canadian shield bedrock. To the right of the text sat a second image, a boat. Long and narrow, it carried 16 distinct figures, rendered as simple vertical lines with rounded tops suggesting heads. Below and beside the boat were 14 X-shaped marks. Their purpose was unclear. Crosses, stars, tally marks. The stone had been covered by soil. How much soil was uncertain. Several inches at minimum, possibly more. The fallen tree's roots had torn away the covering layer, exposing the carving to daylight for the first time in perhaps a century or more. Primrose understood immediately that authentication would require expertise he did not possess. He needed a runologist, someone who could read these symbols if they were genuine. In 2018, such specialists were rare and almost all based in Scandinavia. He began reaching out. An epigrapher in Finland reviewed photographs and referred Primrose to Henrik Williams. Williams was emeritus professor at Uppsala University in Sweden, one of the world's leading experts in runology. He had spent decades studying runic inscriptions across Scandinavia, authenticating stones, translating texts, and identifying forgeries. Williams agreed to examine the Wawa stone. In October of 2019, he traveled to northern Ontario. The conditions were miserable. Cold rain fell steadily. The site was remote, accessible only by rough trails. Williams and the archaeological team set up a tarpaulin over the stone. Williams crouched beneath it for 3 hours with a flashlight, tracing each symbol, photographing details, cross-referencing characters against known runic alphabets. The others sat outside, freezing. The work was painstaking. One wrong identification could throw off the entire translation. But slowly the text revealed itself. The symbols were runes. Specifically, they were characters from a system developed in the early 1600s by Johannes Bureus, a Swedish polymath and mystic who had revived interest in runic writing. Bureus had published a booklet in 1611 called Runa ABC, the first Swedish alphabet book. It taught Swedes how to write their language using adapted runic characters rather than Latin letters. Included in that booklet was the Lord's Prayer, written entirely in runes. Williams compared the Wawa carving to Bureus's 1611 text. The match was nearly exact. The Wawa stone reproduced the full Lord's Prayer in Swedish, using Bureus's runic system, letter for letter. It was the longest runic inscription ever found in North America. It was also the only known inscription anywhere in the world that reproduced the complete Lord's Prayer in runes. Williams emerged from under the tarpaulin, soaked and cold but certain. This was not a Viking relic. Vikings had used earlier runic alphabets and a different language, Old Norse. This stone used early modern Swedish and a deliberate 17th century revival script. It was not ancient, but it was authentic. Someone had spent days, perhaps weeks, carving this prayer into Canadian bedrock roughly 200 years ago. The question that now consumed everyone was simple and impossible. Who? And more importantly, why here? Why this prayer? Why in runes when Latin letters would have been easier? The stone offered no biography, no signature, no explanation beyond the prayer itself. Just 255 carefully carved characters, a boat, and 14 mysterious marks. The work of someone who cared deeply enough to spend weeks in isolation, chiseling faith into stone. Building this carving was never a matter of picking up a chisel and starting. The scale of the work demanded planning that bordered on obsession. Ryan Primrose and Henrik Williams studied the stone and immediately grasped the challenge. The location, bedrock in dense northern Ontario forest, was dramatic yet isolated. The nearest town, Wawa, was small and remote even today. In the 1800s, it would have been wilderness interrupted only by fur, trading routes, and rare Hudson's Bay Company posts. There were no Swedish communities nearby. No churches, no settlements documented in historical records. This carver was alone. Williams's analysis was systematic. The inscription consisted of 255 characters arranged in horizontal rows. Each rune was carved with deliberate precision, angular strokes cut deeply into stone. The depth of the carving, several millimeters into hard bedrock, meant this was not scratched lightly. The carver used metal tools, likely iron or steel chisels, and struck them repeatedly with force. Rock dust would have filled the air. Each stroke risked shattering the stone if angled wrong. Williams estimated the work required days and days of continuous labor. Someone must have spent a couple of weeks carving this thing. The carver worked methodically, row by row, character by character, following the text from memory or from a printed copy of Bureus's prayer. Mistakes were rare. The spelling matched the 1611 original almost perfectly, suggesting either exceptional memory or access to the text while carving. The boat carving added complexity. 16 figures sat in the vessel, each rendered with simple vertical strokes. The boat's shape suggested a Scandinavian design, long and narrow, suitable for river or coastal travel. The 14 X marks flanked the boat. Their meaning remained debated. Williams suggested they might represent people, perhaps crew or passengers. Others proposed stars, graves, or years. Without additional context, interpretation was speculative. The carver's method was private rather than public. This was not art for display. The stone lay flat on the ground, not upright like a monument. The carving faced upward, readable only when standing directly over it. After completion, it was buried. Soil covered the entire surface, hiding the prayer from view. Whether burial was intentional or natural remains unknown. If intentional, it suggests the carving served a private purpose, a personal devotion, a hidden memorial, a secret practice in a land far from home. The logistics were humbling. The carver needed tools. Metal chisels were not wilderness items. They had to be carried from trading posts or settlements, possibly hundreds of miles away. The carver needed time. Days of uninterrupted work in the forest required either isolation or permission. If this person worked for the Hudson's Bay Company, stationed at a remote post, free time would have been limited. Laborers worked long hours, 6 days a week. Carving 255 symbols into bedrock was not a casual weekend project. The carver needed motivation. The Lord's Prayer is Christianity's most fundamental text, taught to children, recited by believers worldwide. Writing it in runes, a script most Swedes had abandoned by the 1800s, was an act of deliberate archaism. It connected the carver to Sweden's pre-Christian past while expressing Christian faith. It was both nostalgic and devout, a bridge between two worlds. And the carver needed solitude. No evidence suggests this was a group project. One person, working alone, driven by forces we can only guess. Faith, homesickness, identity, grief, hope. The stone does not answer. It only asks, and this must have been a Swede. Were there any Swedes at all here? The forest held this secret. The stone lay finished, the soil covered. That first autumn after carving, if we imagine the early 1800s, rain soaked the ground. Leaves fell and layered over the hidden prayer. Seasons turned, snow, thaw, growth, decay. The forest forgot the stone. Or perhaps it remembered in the only way forests can, silently, without record, until chance exposed what devotion had buried. Close to the surface, nature began to reclaim. Roots spread, soil deepened, the rectangular carving became invisible to anyone walking overhead. But beyond that thin covering, the wider region held harder questions. To the south and west, Hudson's Bay Company posts dotted the wilderness, forts, trading stations, supply depots. These outposts sustained the fur trade that drove European presence in northern Canada for 2 centuries. The company employed hundreds, laborers from England, Scotland, France, indigenous peoples, and yes, Scandinavians. Company records from the 1800s confirm Swedish workers at remote posts throughout the Canadian wilderness. One such post was Michipikoten, located not far from Wawa, along the northeastern shore of Lake Superior. Established in the late 1600s, Michipikoten served as a critical link in the fur trade network. Workers there lived in isolation, months passing between supply shipments. Life was harsh. Winter temperatures plummeted. Food ran short. Contact with home, thousands of miles across the Atlantic, was infrequent and uncertain. For Swedish workers, the isolation would have been profound. Sweden in the 1800s was a nation of Lutheran faith, rural traditions, and deep connection to language and heritage. Runes, though no longer in common use, remained part of cultural memory. Bureus's Runa ABC had been republished in the 19th century, keeping the knowledge accessible. A Swedish worker far from home carrying a copy or remembering the text might carve it into stone as an anchor. A declaration, "I am here, I believe, I remember." The Hudson's Bay Company, chartered in 1670, dominated the Canadian fur trade for more than 2 centuries. By the 1800s, its network of posts stretched across the continent, from Hudson Bay to the Pacific coast. The company needed laborers, and it recruited from across Europe. Scottish Highlanders fleeing clearances, Orkney Islanders seeking work, French Canadians from Quebec, indigenous peoples who knew the land, and, yes, Scandinavians, including Swedes, drawn by wages that, while modest, exceeded what they could earn. At home, these workers signed multi-year contracts. They paddled canoes thousands of miles inland, portaging around rapids, navigating through unknown territories. They worked as voyageurs, carrying furs and supplies, as laborers, building posts and maintaining equipment, as traders, negotiating with indigenous trappers. Their lives were governed by company rules, company schedules, company needs. Personal time was scarce, privacy even more so. Yet someone found time, found privacy, and found motivation to carve a prayer into bedrock far from any post. But was this person from Michipicoten? The distance from that post to the Wawa stone is significant, dozens of miles through rough terrain. Travel would have been by foot or canoe, time-consuming and dangerous. Why travel so far to carve a prayer? Perhaps the carver was not stationed at Michipicoten, but traveled through the region. Trappers, scouts, and surveyors moved widely, mapping territories and assessing resources. Perhaps the site held personal significance, a place of rest or reflection on a long journey. Or perhaps the carver lived nearby, at a smaller post or temporary camp not recorded in company ledgers. Primrose researched the Hudson's Bay Company archives extensively. Personnel records, payroll documents, supply lists. Swedish names appeared in the 1800s, confirming their presence, but no records specifically mention Wawa or the carving site. No journals describe a prayer carved into bedrock. The company kept meticulous accounts of goods and transactions, but cared little for personal devotions. If a worker spent weeks carving a prayer in the forest, it would not appear in official logs. The absence of documentation does not disprove the theory. It simply leaves us with silence where we want answers. The stone was there. The prayer was carved. Someone did this. The runes hold their secret with the patience of stone. What is certain is effort. Whoever carved this text invested immense labor for reasons that mattered deeply to them. The work was hidden, not displayed. It was personal, not public. And it endured. For roughly 2 centuries, the prayer lay beneath soil, waiting for a storm, a fallen tree, and a historian's careful eye. To understand the depth of this mystery, one must first understand the runes themselves. The symbols carved into the Wawa stone belong to what scholars call Bureus runes, a 17th century adaptation of the ancient runic alphabet. A runic alphabet is an early writing system used by Germanic and Scandinavian peoples, where each symbol represented both a sound and often a symbolic meaning. The earliest runes, called Elder Futhark, originated among Germanic-speaking peoples between the 2nd and 8th centuries AD. These runes appear on weapons, jewelry, stones, and wooden objects found across northern Europe. The name Futhark comes from the first 6 characters, F, U, Th, A, R, K. The alphabet contained 24 characters in total, each with its own name and symbolic association. Fehu meant cattle or wealth, Uruz meant aurochs or strength, Thurisaz meant giant or gateway. These were not merely letters but symbols imbued with meaning, used for both mundane writing and magical purposes. By the 8th century, the Elder Futhark evolved into simpler forms. In Scandinavia, it became the Younger Futhark with only 16 characters. The reduction was practical, adapting to changes in spoken language, but it also marked a shift away from the elaborate symbolism of earlier times. In England, runic writing expanded into the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, with additional symbols to accommodate Old English sounds. But by the High Middle Ages, roughly 1000 to 1300 AD, runic writing largely disappeared, replaced by the Latin alphabet as Christianity spread across Europe. Churches taught Latin letters. monasteries copied manuscripts in Latin script. Runes became associated with paganism, with the old ways, with resistance to Christian authority. Knowledge of how to read the original systems faded. Runes became curiosities, mysterious marks on old stones that few could interpret. Farmers might carve simple runes on tools or calendar sticks, but the sophisticated literacy of earlier centuries was lost. But by the High Middle Ages, roughly 1000 to 1300 AD, runic writing largely disappeared, replaced by the Latin alphabet as Christianity spread across Europe. Knowledge of how to read the original systems faded. Runes became curiosities, mysterious marks on old stones that few could interpret. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that Norwegian scholar Sophus Bugge successfully deciphered Elder Futhark in 1865, unlocking the ancient texts. But long before Bugge's breakthrough, one man kept runic knowledge alive in Sweden, Johannes Bureus. Born in 1568 in Åkerby near Uppsala, Bureus was a polymath, antiquarian, mystic, and Sweden's first national librarian. He combined scholarly rigor with esoteric interests, studying runes not just as historical artifacts, but as keys to ancient wisdom. Bureus believed runes held secrets, connections to a pre-Christian Swedish Golden Age, links between the divine and human worlds. He was influenced by Renaissance occultism, Kabbalah, Rosicrucianism, and Hermetic philosophy. For Bureus, runes were not dead letters, but living symbols. In the late 1500s, Bureus traveled through rural Sweden, particularly the province of Dalarna, where farmers still carved runes on wooden calendar sticks and household items. These runes were simplified, practical, different from the elaborate Elder Futhark, but they preserved a thread of continuity. Bureus learned from them, documenting runestones and transcribing inscriptions. He catalogued hundreds of stones, drawing them, translating them, trying to understand their messages. In 1611, Bureus published Runa ABC, a booklet designed to teach Swedes how to write their language using runes. It was the first Swedish alphabet book, combining the Latin alphabet with runic characters. Bureus adapted the ancient symbols to fit contemporary Swedish pronunciation, creating a hybrid system. The booklet included Christian texts written entirely in runes, including the Lord's Prayer. This was revolutionary. Bureus believed that Christianity had unfairly suppressed runic writing by replacing it with Latin letters. His mission was revival, preserving Swedish heritage through script. He argued that runes were Sweden's original alphabet, God's gift to the Swedish people, and that abandoning them meant abandoning identity. The Runa ABC was both practical and symbolic. It taught literacy while asserting cultural pride. It allowed Swedes to write prayers, contracts, letters, all in characters their ancestors had used. The text was republished in the 19th century, ensuring its availability to Swedish readers long after Bureus's death in 1652. This revival explains the Wawa stone. The carver used Bureus's system, not ancient runes. The language is early modern Swedish, not Old Norse. The prayer matches the 1611 version almost exactly. This was not an attempt to mimic Viking Age inscriptions. It was a deliberate use of a 17th century revival script, carried forward into the 1800s by Swedish immigrants or workers who valued their linguistic heritage. Henrik Williams emphasizes this distinction. The Wawa stone is not ancient. It does not connect to Viking exploration of North America around 1000 AD. That connection, while romantic, is historically inaccurate. The only confirmed Norse settlement in North America is L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, dated to approximately 1021 AD through dendrochronology and radiocarbon analysis. The Wawa stone sits hundreds of miles and centuries apart from that context. Instead, it represents something quieter but equally profound, a Swedish person in the 1800s, far from home, preserving faith and identity through a nearly forgotten script. The pairing of the Lord's Prayer with Bureus runes is historically significant. Christianity and ancient runes are often seen as opposites, the new faith replacing the old ways, but Bureus saw them as compatible. His runes were Christian runes, tools for expressing Lutheran devotion in a script that honored Sweden's past. The Wawa carver inherited that vision. They chose to write the most fundamental Christian prayer in characters their ancestors might have recognized. It was an act of cultural continuity, faith meeting heritage in the Canadian wilderness. Autumn of the early 1800s arrived with uncertainty. The carving was finished. The prayer lay complete. The carver, whoever they were, stood and looked down at weeks of labor. 255 runes, each one deliberate, each stroke a small act of faith. The boat with its 16 passengers, the 14 X marks, all carved deeply enough to last centuries. And then burial. Soil was pushed over the stone, covering the surface inch by inch until nothing showed. Whether this was reverent concealment or practical protection, we cannot know. Perhaps the carver intended to return, to uncover the stone for prayer or reflection. Perhaps they wanted it hidden, a secret between themselves and God. Perhaps they simply covered it to protect the carving from erosion, planning to maintain it through the years. But they did not return, or if they did, they left no trace. The soil deepened, forest litter accumulated. Seasons passed, the stone disappeared from human memory. For the carver, Wawa and its surroundings were likely temporary. Hudson's Bay Company workers moved frequently, reassigned to different posts as company needs shifted. If this person worked for the company, they probably left the region within months or years. Did they think of the stone in later life? Did they tell anyone what they had done? Did they hope someone would find it? We have no answers. What we have is the stone itself. And in 2018, a storm answered the carver's unspoken question. The tree fell. The roots tore away soil. Light touched the runes for the first time in perhaps 2 centuries. A historian saw the symbols and wondered. Archaeologists investigated. Experts authenticated. And now, finally, the work is known. But knowledge brings new questions. Ryan Primrose and Henrik Williams published their findings in June of 2025, 7 years after discovery. The delay was deliberate. They wanted certainty before public announcement. We didn't want to release information publicly until we had done as much as we could at the time to understand exactly what it was. They worried about vandalism, treasure hunters, or misinterpretation. The stone sits on private land. Agreements had to be negotiated with the property owner. Plans had to be developed for protection and potential public access. Primrose has applied for a leasehold to create a heritage site. The vision includes a protective shelter over the stone, informational panels explaining its significance, and controlled visitor access. Preservation is paramount. Exposed to weather, the carving will erode. Freeze-thaw cycles crack stone. Water seeps into carved lines, freezes, expands, and gradually widens the grooves until details blur. Foot traffic wears surfaces. Human oils from touching stone accelerate decay. Moss and lichen colonize shaded areas, their roots penetrating microscopic cracks. Without protection, the prayer could be illegible within a generation. The work required to preserve the Wawa stone is ongoing and complex. Archaeologists document every millimeter with high-resolution photography and 3-dimensional scanning. Multiple angles, varying light conditions, raking light that emphasizes depth, all captured digitally. These digital records ensure that even if the physical stone deteriorates, the inscription survives in data. Computer models can be rotated, zoomed, analyzed. Future researchers will have access to the stone as it appeared in 2018, preserved in pixels even if the bedrock crumbles. Conservators study the weathering patterns, analyzing how much erosion has occurred since carving. They measure the depth of runes, compare edges, examine tool marks. Rock surfaces weather at predictable rates depending on climate, exposure, and stone composition. By studying the degree of weathering, conservators can estimate minimum age. The Wawa stone shows significant wear, consistent with exposure over many decades, possibly centuries. But precision is difficult. Canadian shield granite is exceptionally hard and weathers slowly. A carving made in 1800 might look similar to one made in 1850. The soil covering complicates estimates. Buried stone weathers differently than exposed stone. How long was the carving visible before burial? How deeply was it buried? These variables introduce uncertainty. Some researchers suggest microerosion analysis or detailed examination of tool marks might narrow the time frame. Others hope for archival discoveries, a journal entry or company letter mentioning the carving, a ship's log listing a Swedish worker named in payroll records as stationed near Wawa, a family letter describing religious practices in the wilderness. Until then, estimates point to the early to mid-1800s based on historical context, weathering observations, and the known dates of Swedish employment by the Hudson's Bay Company. The uncertainty does not diminish significance. Whether carved in 1810 or 1860, the stone remains an extraordinary artifact, a testament to faith and cultural identity preserved in the most unlikely location. The inscription's content adds layers of meaning. The Lord's Prayer is Christianity's foundational text, found in the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke. It addresses God as Father, asks for daily bread, seeks forgiveness, and requests deliverance from evil. For Christians, it is both personal and communal, recited individually and in congregations. The Swedish version on the Wawa stone follows the Lutheran tradition, reflecting the state religion of Sweden in the 1800s. That the prayer is complete, not abbreviated or excerpted, suggests the carver valued accuracy. They wanted the full text, every word, carved permanently into stone. The boat carving resists easy interpretation. Williams and Primrose offer several theories. It could symbolize the journey from Sweden to Canada, an immigrant's voyage across the Atlantic. It could represent a biblical image, the boat as a vessel of salvation, a common Christian metaphor. It could depict an actual boat the carver used, a canoe or longboat for travel through northern Ontario's waterways. The 16 figures might represent crew, family members, fellow workers, or souls on a spiritual journey. The 14 X marks remain the most enigmatic element. If they are crosses, they might signify graves or deaths, perhaps commemorating lives lost on the journey to Canada or during harsh winters. If they are stars, they might represent guidance, navigation, or divine presence. If they are tally marks, they could count years, months, or people. Without additional context, speculation dominates. What is clear is intention. The boat and marks were carved with the same care as the text. They were not afterthoughts but integral parts of the composition. They meant something to the carver, even if that meaning is lost to us. The Wawa stone is Canada's rarest inscription. It is the longest runic inscription in North America. It is the only known reproduction of the complete Lord's Prayer in runes anywhere in the world. These superlatives are factual, confirmed by expert analysis. Canada now has a total of 11 objects claimed to bear runes, but only 5 in fact do so, and 3 of those constitute modern commemorative inscriptions. The Wawa stone is Ontario's first with actual runes, the longest runic inscription of any on the North American continent, and the only one in the world reproducing the Lord's Prayer. But these facts do not capture the emotional weight. Somewhere in the 1800s, a Swedish person stood in northern Ontario forest, far from everything familiar. They carried with them language, faith, and memory. They chose to carve those things into stone, spending weeks on labor that no one might ever see. They chose a script that connected them to ancestors 1,000 years dead and to a scholar 3 centuries past. They chose the Lord's Prayer, words recited by millions but here rendered unique. And then they covered it, not for fame, not for recognition, but for reasons we can only imagine. Devotion, grief, hope, homesickness, identity. The stone does not say, it only waits. The Wawa stone reveals something profound about the immigrant experience. When people leave home, they carry more than belongings. They carry language, stories, prayers, traditions. These intangible things become anchors, ways of maintaining identity in unfamiliar places. For Swedish workers in the Hudson's Bay Company, the journey to Canada was transformative and traumatic. They left families, communities, landscapes they had known their entire lives. They crossed the Atlantic, a voyage of weeks in cramped ships. They traveled inland by canoe, paddling thousands of miles through territories they could not have imagined. They lived among people who spoke languages they did not understand, in climates more extreme than Sweden's, doing work that was physically brutal and dangerous. In such circumstances, maintaining cultural identity was not luxury but necessity. It was psychological survival. The Lord's Prayer, in Swedish runes, was more than religious text. It was Sweden itself distilled into 255 characters. It was home, portable, and permanent. The carver could not bring Sweden to Canada, but they could bring Swedish script, Swedish prayer, Swedish identity, and carve it into Canadian stone. The choice of runes over Latin letters deepens this interpretation. Latin letters would have been easier, faster, more familiar to anyone who might see the carving. But the carver chose runes deliberately. They wanted Swedish runes specifically, not just Swedish words. They wanted the script Bureus had revived, the script that connected modern Swedes to their pre-Christian ancestors. This was assertion of heritage at its most fundamental level. In a wilderness dominated by indigenous peoples, French Canadians, Scottish traders, and English administrators, this Swedish worker carved Swedish identity into the landscape. They claimed space, not territorially, but culturally. They said, "I was here. My people were here. Our prayers, our script, our faith, these matter. These endure." For 200 years, it waited beneath soil and roots and silence. Until a storm, a tree, a historian, archaeologists, and now you. The mystery persists. The stone still lies where it was found, its carved symbols glowing faintly in angled light. It remains one of the most unusual inscriptions ever uncovered. Mysteries, they do tend to attract people, and this one will certainly do that. Unlike the grand estates of the Gilded Age or the monuments of empires, this carving makes no claim to greatness. It is modest, hidden, personal, yet its survival speaks to something essential about human nature. We need to be remembered. We need our beliefs, our identities, our very existence to mean something beyond our brief lives. The Swedish carver achieved that. 2 centuries after their hand last touched chisel to stone, we are talking about them, wondering about them, honoring their effort. They are anonymous, but not forgotten. The prayer they carved connects us across time, across culture, across language. We may never know their name, but we know their faith. We may never see their face, but we see their work. And that is a kind of immortality. The mansion George Vanderbilt built survived because it learned to serve. The stone the Swedish carver made survived because it learned to hide. Both are acts of preservation, different methods toward the same end. Endurance. Beauty alone is not enough. Faith alone is not enough. Grand visions need resources, deep beliefs need expression, and both, without adaptation, guarantee fading. The Wawa stone endured because the carver chose permanence. Not wood, which rots, not paper, which burns, stone. hard Canadian shield bedrock that defies time. The choice was deliberate. The effort was immense. The result is survival. Who paid for the Wawa inscription? The carver who spent weeks chiseling. The Swedish heritage that gave them script and language. The faith that drove the work. The forest that held the secret. And now the archaeologists and public who sustain interest. How much does the mystery cost? More than time. It costs curiosity, respect, adaptation, and the humility to admit we may never know the full story, and the willingness to protect what remains even when answers hide. The carving survived because it was forgotten, and now, remembered, it survives because we choose to care. If you enjoy deep investigations into archaeological mysteries and the people who left them behind, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Tell me in the comments which historic mystery should we explore next. The Kensington Runestone controversy? Lons aux Meadows and Viking Canada? The petroglyphs of the Canadian Shield? Or perhaps something unexpected? A forgotten inscription with a story waiting to be told. These carvings aren't just symbols. They're chapters in human history. Made by real people, carved with real effort, and preserved through real mystery. Every inscription has its secrets. Every prayer has its cost. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next investigation.